The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is When You Look.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Created in the Image of God. It's episode 218. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable the trajectory and the great guests we've had. I'm so excited about tonight's guest. I want to just quickly, though, reflect on last week's guest, John Didakis. John is currently a mystery thriller writer, acclaimed, written, I think, 5 of them and going strong. But as you know, if you tuned in last week, he used to be a CNN editor. He worked on He worked with Pat Robertson during his presidential campaign as part of CBN Network. He used to be the editor with Wolf Blitzer's show. And we talked a lot about, is fiction stranger than truth, right? And today we have a gentleman who actually asks that question in the sense that, is it God that was involved in this story, or was it coincidence? His name is Mick Wienholt, and he has a show, When You Look, and he interviews guests and he draws out their fascinating stories on their divine walk. We're going to find out tonight what he does and have fun with that question. Welcome to the studio, Mick.
Hey, Wade, thanks a bunch for having me here. Pleasure.
And, I forget exactly when we first connected. We've had a couple of conversations, and I've really been looking forward to this show. I've been watching a little bit what you do and how you do it. How we roll on this show, of course, is always to go back to your creation story, your origin story. So tell us a little bit about your parents, where you grew up, what it was like growing up, Mick, and, sort of that arc of awareness and how you ended up on the path that you did.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity. I mean, you have a great show here, and it's awesome to be able to tell stories that glorify God. So to answer your question more specifically, I'm originally from Greater Baltimore, Maryland, East Coast of the United States. And I grew up, Wade, in what most people would consider to be a Christian household, meaning that there was discussion about God, there was discussion about Jesus, those types of things. But I'm going to put Christian in air quotes, because what I observed as a little kid was a scenario where I heard all these things about God being loving and Jesus being their savior, but I saw a lot of angst and I saw a big disconnect in the behaviors of my parents relative to what they talked about in the Bible. And so what that gave me was something that I couldn't articulate at the time, but I very much kind of sensed that there was this disconnect. And my parents were very heavy on discipline. And frankly, looking back on it, I needed the discipline. Okay. But at the same time, as a kid, I was not very interested in the discipline. And so my folks had rules, and we didn't have that great of a relationship. They certainly love me. I'm in no way trying to speak ill of my folks. I know they did a great job raising me, but my experience was one where I got a lot of discipline, didn't really feel a lot of love. And I know that's very much a subjective type of thing. And so we've probably both heard that phrase before of rules without relationship equals rebellion. And so I very much embodied that into my teen years, rebelled against my folks as hard as I could. And despite going through Christian-based education from first grade through 12th grade, I did everything that I could to also rebel against God. So I wanted him and his rules and his potential discipline, as I saw it, to stay as far away from me and my life as I possibly could. And so, as soon as I graduated high school, Wade, I moved 1,800 miles away to greater Denver, Colorado. My attempt here was to get as far away from my folks as possible. And my brother lived in Colorado. And so I had a temporary landing place there in order to be able to kind of get myself up and running as an adult and then begin to put myself through college. And as a 19-year-old at that point living in Colorado, I end up getting into an absolutely massive accident that was entirely my own doing, and one where God very much showed up. And we'll talk about that to whatever extent you want. But that's sort of the formative years of growing up in a quote unquote Christian household and rebelling as hard as I could.
Well, yeah, thank you. That's a great pause point because I want to dive back into a couple of things. Those are common themes, but the way in which you articulate them makes me want to unpack them, and I think there's going to be some good value here. So rules without relationship equal rebellion. And I'm a parent. I have two kids, freshman and senior in high school. So I'm experiencing that, and I'm looking back on what did I do, what didn't I do. Taking a step even back from that, you and I were talking about the book of Genesis. We were talking about Cain and Abel. We were talking about Jesus flipping the script on that. We were talking about old wineskins and new wine.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the Bible itself, the progression from Adam through Noah, Abraham, Moses. And, Paul talks about the law being a schoolmaster. But that law came from God, and that's what he gave us. You said you needed it. And guess what? We needed it. But it still leads to rebellion, right? And so how do you think? So I'm just kind of emphasizing what you said and bringing it back to our full awareness. How do you think God feels or responds to the fact that a lot of kids are rebelling because of this, and they're also rebelling against God? Surely he's seen it a billion times and he's dealt with it a billion times.
Yeah.
But let's take it to that level. I'm just curious, since you've raised it up articulately, I'm just curious of your perspective on this.
Yeah, wow. I mean, you're really asking me to essentially put my God hat on or step into his shoes. So I'm going to preface all of this.
Then do it as a parent, right? Let's pretend pretend you adopted foster kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will still have some fun with this because it's a wonderful question, But I want to preface with the Isaiah 55 is very, very clear that his ways are far higher than mine.
We have no clue really, but he also commands us to know him and to worship him.
So I think to that end, where I have seen, having read through the Bible cover to cover multiple times, and what God has revealed to me in that process is really about his character. And so in answering your question, I think with the rules, right, when I'm saying rules, I'm thinking primarily of the 10 commandments, right? And then certainly what we got with Jesus kind of furthering and validating much of that as well. So when I'm thinking of all of that, I think that they are there for his kids to have direction and guidance on how to live in a way that honors him. And yet when they break them, sometimes unintentionally, many, many, many times intentionally, right? Certainly as I did. I think God probably has a perspective of, I'm going to bring you back, because I think he's in the business of redeeming. And I've seen it on my shows. You kind of let in many, in the intro, I've seen it on my show so many times, and I've experienced it in my own personal life, of where no matter how deep the sin was, he redeemed it. And so I think it's a guidepost at all times for direction, and one where he goes, I'm just going to bring you back to this. This is guidance for you. I'm eventually going to bring you back to where you're interested and desire to, oh man, I hate to say this phrase because it kind of like grates against me. Follow the rules, right? Follow my direction is what sounds so much better to my soul. Follow my direction as opposed to follow my rules, although they're largely the same thing without being legalistic, you know?
Well, going back to the Garden of Eden again, I like to formulate it like this, right? God puts two trees in the garden, and then he says, we can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way.
Mm. Yeah.
Oh, you've chosen to do it the hard way.
Well, that's how it went in my life for sure, and as I've matured as a Christian, and by that I mean as I've spent more than a decade in relationship with God, that is what has allowed me to be so much more interested in doing it the easy way. Sometimes it doesn't go that way, and I'm not implying that life has been easy, but the desire to do it his way, aka the easy way, right, has really changed for me once I got into and maintained relationship with God through Jesus.
Well, when you think about it, Jesus' sacrifice is even evidence that God is acknowledging and sharing with us very clearly that he understands, hey, I get it, that even the easy way is very hard.
Mm. Yeah.
The easy way is not really easy because the mountain is so high. I mean, okay, so the serpent, implies that God doesn't want you to become like him, when in fact the whole purpose of our creation is to become like him. But we've just, you cited Isaiah 55 and many examples of, that's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
That's Mount Everest without oxygen.
Yeah. Although some people have climbed that, but I track with you on your analogy for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into that story that you were teeing up, the accident. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. So as mentioned, I moved to Colorado, and at that point as a 19-year-old, I am 100% fueled by ego and Mountain Dew. And I was a outdoor enthusiast. I ice climbed, I rock climbed, I hiked 14,000 foot peaks, of which Colorado has many, many, many of those. I bicycled, mountain biked, all kinds of stuff. And there are two 14,000 foot peaks that are very close to Greater Denver, and they're known as Gray's Peak and Torrey's Peak. And they're smack next to each other. And so most people will do both of them in the same single day hike. And I had done that myself, and it's a very, very popular place to be on the weekends in the summer. And so having done both of them, my ego said, you need to go do it better. So fast forward some number of months, and it's now snowing. We're no longer in the summer season. And so it's November 7th, Wade, of 2000. And you and I are both old enough to remember that specific day when I tell you that it was the day of the hanging Chad. This is George W. Bush versus Al Gore in the presidential election. And I worked retail. So at that point in the week, I was off, and I voted and then ran to the mountains to climb Gray's Peak. But in this case, not hike it, actually climb it. And so I was going to climb what was known as a couloir. Okay, it's called Lost Rat Couloir. So think of the double black diamond chutes that people would ski or snowboard down at the top of a ski resort, right? These are very, very steep, and typically the ones that you might even have to hike to. They're not even lift served necessarily, right? So a narrow chute of snow, and my intention was to climb that and then hike to the top of the peak once I had summited to the ridge of that particular climb and that particular couloir. And then at that point, I was going to go over to Torrey's Peak and then come back down and quite literally, Wade, be home for dinner, at least so I had planned. So the base of that Lost Rat Couloir is at about 12,800 feet. And I start up the climb and I get around 200 or 300 feet up from the base of that climb. And now, just so that everybody can have the right visual, we're beyond hiking. This is not vertical climbing by any stretch, but imagine going up the steepest possible snow slope that someone would ski or snowboard down. And so you're using all fours to ascend. Okay. And I'm a couple hundred feet, as mentioned, up this route. And because I'm climbing, I'm disturbing the snow. And as a result of disturbing the snow, because we're early season here, we're November. So everything looks beautiful. It's covered in snow, but there isn't enough snow for all of that snow to be stable. And what ends up happening is that what I was doing in disturbing the snow as I was climbing literally triggered an avalanche. So I hear, Wade, whoomph, that distinctive settling of snow sound. I look up and am able to see the fracture line and immediately notice that the snow is coming towards me. So I took one step to my left in an attempt I'm chuckling here because it's insane. But my attempt was to outrun the snow.
I'll sidestep this avalanche.
Absolutely. Yep. And I got one step, truly one step to my left, and I was swept off my feet. And Wade, I remember thinking to myself the following: as I'm swept off my feet, this is going to suck for my family, especially my mom. And then the lights went out. And so I regained consciousness at the bottom, sitting on a rock of all things. And I sat up and did this systems check, and I knew things weren't good, but it seemed like all systems were a go.
And how far was the drop? How far was the fall?
Yeah. Somewhere between 200 and 300 vertical feet. Yeah. So, and I'll tell you in just a moment sort of what my injuries consisted of, because at this particular point in the story, I know that I'm hurt, but I really have no idea how badly I'm hurt. So, as mentioned, all systems were a go, at least from my perspective, and that was the verb for sure, go. So I focused on hiking back to my pickup truck at the trailhead, and that was right around 3 miles. So I worked my way back down from the base of the climb all the way back to the trail, and then began to move quickly back on the trail to the trailhead. And my estimate here is that I'm probably 90 or so minutes in this traveling. Okay. And during my time hiking down the trail, I'm able to do a little bit of assessing, and I realize that something is wrong with my mouth because I am bleeding and spitting a bunch of blood from my mouth, but I have no idea what is necessarily wrong with my mouth. And then I also was experiencing blood tripping into my right eye. And it was one of those weird things, Wade, where whenever I tried to address the blood, it just simply made it worse. And I made this very conscious decision to just simply let it drip and bleed. So there was just blood literally just dripping down from my face onto my jacket. Well, I make it back to the trailhead parking lot. And as I'm coming into the trailhead parking lot, and there's these large trail signs, I'm able to see that there's a guy standing there. And I walk very quickly past him because I'm focused on getting to my pickup truck. He comes over to me immediately as he sees me and asks me what happened. And I very plainly told him I was in an avalanche as I walked right by him on the way to my truck. He and I are the only two people in this parking lot because remember, it's a Tuesday. It's now a Tuesday late afternoon. And most people aren't playing in the mountains on a Tuesday, let alone in early winter conditions where it's beautiful, but very unsafe. So long story short, this guy has to actually help me get into my pickup truck, okay? because I kept the key for my truck bolted to the underneath of the pickup truck bed. The idea there is that I would lock my keys in my car in the event that I was ever in such a precarious situation in the backcountry that I had to give up or somehow lost my backpack, that if I could make it back to my vehicle, I could gain access to my vehicle. So I locked my keys in my car. This guy had to climb underneath the pickup truck bed, grab the spare key, and then help me get into the vehicle. And the intention of getting into the vehicle was twofold. One, I wanted to get my warm down jacket and put that on because I was very cold. And then two, my intention, Wade, was to then drive myself to the hospital. Okay. But in the process of once we'd gotten into the vehicle, I then go to take off my ski jacket or my Gore-Tex rain shell. Okay. And I'm a strapping young 19-year-old athletic guy. And I go to unzip the jacket and I get it down to right around the top of my sternum. And I can't get it down any further for two reasons. One is that all of that blood that had been dripping, as I'd mentioned, was coagulated on the front of my jacket and it had frozen. So I don't now have enough strength to get through all of that in order to literally take my jacket off. And it was at that point that I realized that I need this guy, and his name is Steve. I need Steve to take me to the hospital. And up to that point, Steve had mentioned many times, let me take you to the hospital. You're not in good shape. And I said, I'm fine. I'll just drive myself. Well, I get into his vehicle, and I'm making this a very, very quick story, but I get into his vehicle, immediately lose consciousness. I regain consciousness at the hospital that he took me to, which was Summit Medical Center in Frisco, Colorado. They were going to flight for life me down to Denver, which was a major trauma center. But as they told me, the weather had changed dramatically, and so a helicopter ride was out of play for me. So they rushed me down in an ambulance. And that night, I ended up having to have emergency brain surgery because what had happened was in that slide and fall, all of the injuries that I had sustained were to my head. So I mentioned something wrong with my mouth while I'd broken my jaw on both sides. I'd mentioned the blood dripping. Well, that was because I was split from just over my right eyebrow all the way to the top back of my head. And so I also ended up with my skull being fractured in 3 different places and losing hearing in my left ear that partially some of it recovered. So I end up in an incredibly bad situation. And every bit of what put me there was my ego. And what saved me was a complete stranger named God. And what I know for sure is that if Steve is not in that parking lot, Wade, I die in that parking lot because I can't even get my jacket off. I mean, that's
you couldn't even get the key.
Couldn't get the key. Can't even get the jacket off. And Steve had no business being in that parking lot. So let me just round that out very quickly. Steve is 3 miles, truly 3 full miles up a snow-covered dirt road. And he doesn't have any reason to be there. He got a 1/4 mile up the road and realized, this is not a good idea. But he had a relatively new to him Toyota Tacoma 4-wheel drive pickup truck, and he was interested in driving in snow. So he starts up that road and realizes bad idea, but then thinks to himself, if I back down, that might even be worse. So I'll keep going and see if there's a safe place for me to turn around. He goes 3 full miles, and 30 seconds before I walked into that parking lot, he drove into that parking lot. 100% miracle. I'm a dead man if he's not there.
And this is the moment where who decides whether it's coincidence or God in your show?
Yeah, this is absolutely where I would ask that question. So was it coincidence or God? And
we'll let the audience think about that. We're going to go to a quick commercial break so they know what I'm talking about. And when we come back, we'll just let it roll. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back with more of Mick Wienholt.
This is the When You Look show. where ordinary people share their extraordinary experiences, and you get to decide, was it coincidence or God? It's a space for real, human conversations, moments where emotions surface naturally and stories unfold with honesty and depth. Some episodes bring laughter and joy. Others open the door to connection and insight. And sometimes, a thoughtful pause says more than words. Guided by host Mick Wienholt, known for creating conversations that flow naturally, guests feel free to share their experiences as they truly are. Each episode captures the spectrum of what it means to be human, from joy and curiosity to meaning and perspective. Every conversation offers a fresh way of seeing, a moment that invites reflection as you consider, was the amazing story coincidence or God? This is the When You Look show.
So for me, no problem whatsoever seeing God's hand there. And so tell us how that changed your life. What that avalanche, well, first of all, how long was the recovery? And then what direction did you choose and how did that come about?
Yeah, so 6 days in the hospital, 3 of which were in intensive care, and then roughly 3 weeks until I was back into college and back into the workforce. My jaw was wired shut for 17 days, and then after that, there's a bunch of rehab to be able to actually eat and open your jaw and all of that type of thing. But large part, 3 to 6-ish weeks or so. And I was kind of back to life in a relatively normal way. It's quite crazy.
Well, I'm
So
reminded of my high school friend Sid Barnes, who rolled his Camaro and broke his jaw. He was lucky to be alive, but he broke his jaw, had it wired shut. My friend Tony and I were actually kind of glad that he couldn't talk for a while.
it certainly does change things.
We got to experience, how he had to take his meals, everything in a blender and then a straw.
Yeah,
But
that's some pudding.
But so what was the inner transformation that came out of that?
Yeah, man, Wade, I've got to be transparent with everybody here. And the reality is that there wasn't much. There really wasn't much. So I gave God what I call intellectual credit for it. I knew it was a miracle. I knew that Steve shouldn't have been there. I knew that he was, but I didn't have any personal maturity. I didn't have any spiritual maturity. I was at this point very actively rebelling against God. And there ultimately wasn't that much in terms of life change. And it was a dozen years later that our firstborn son dies as a full-term stillbirth. And that, Wade, is when my wife and I entered into relationship with God. That's when I got to surrender. But what's been really interesting is, and that was 14 years ago, what's been so interesting, and it relates back to this avalanche conversation that we're having, is that what I didn't realize was happening as God was saving me through Steve. But what was occurring was that even though I was in a true lifestyle and heart set that absolutely hated God, he was still loving me. And that's what he's shown me subsequent to all of that. But only once I was in relationship with him did he actually show me that.
But how does, and I hear this a lot from some of my guests. I just did a pre-recording with somebody who will be on in a few weeks, who has a son who suffers from autism. And that son, and he's nonverbal. I mean, it's severe autism. Yeah. And that son was similarly for him, and it led to a divorce with his wife, on top of him then having to care for that son. I didn't really go into that because the show was actually about other things, but now, so I want to ask you, how does that work? How having your child be a stillbirth lead you to understand God's love?
Yeah. Well, the short version of that is that up to that point, I'm 31 at this point in my life, and I had been successful at work. I'd been successful in life, and every challenge that I had come up against, I was able to solve with some tenacity, some grit, maybe a little bit of learning, a little bit of coaching from
As is evidenced
somebody.
by
Yeah.
zombie-like walking to the car with your head split open and saying, "Don't worry, I got this."
Yeah, I was certainly hard-headed. There's no question about that. But up to that point, right, I've been able to overcome every challenge. And when the doctor told us, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your baby no longer has a heartbeat," I knew I couldn't fix this, and I knew this was beyond me. And so it was a total moment of surrender. And that is when, from all of my upbringing and knowing about God, but never having any relationship with him, that I knew enough to say, when I can't do it, I got to go to him. And that's what ended up happening. So I cried out to him on my knees, not from a spiritual posture, but quite literally from being physically pressed down from the weight of the grief that we were experiencing that in that moment. So being on my knees moments after that in the hospital hallway is when I gave my life to Christ and said, "I need you."
Wow. I think I shared with you my story. I'm going to tell you another story here if we have time. Get your input on it. But I told you the one about the state troopers pursuing me. I think many in my audience know this story, and me literally driving through a light pole, metal freeway light pole, with the light pole still standing and being untouched, and the tracks in
Yeah.
black and white, the pavement in the snow, visibly showing that I did that. No one else saw it. I walked around it around, and my reaction was similar but very different. That transformed my life in a powerful way because, again, I, like you, I wasn't being a good boy. The state troopers weren't chasing me to give me an
Right.
award for being, good. And God spared my life when I was doing that, right? My reaction was a little different. It was to say, okay, I'm yours now. I'm your problem now. Right?
Mhm.
I mean, yours is similar. Um, but it is that relationship, the bond is formed when you realize how important and how necessary God is, how weak and completely powerless we are.
Amen.
I mean, the truth is, I kind of didn't care if I lived or died at that point
Mm.
as a 19-year-old. At that point in time, I was doing really stupid, self-destructive things because I didn't care.
Yeah.
And God showed me he did care. Okay, so now you and your wife are transformed by this. So connect the dots to now you look, I'm sorry, the title,
When you look.
When You Look, to the When You Look show.
Yeah. So, well, we keep coming forward in life and we get to 2018 or so. And I felt as if I got this deposit into me. And it was one word, Wade. It was testimonies. And when I say deposit, it felt like a thing. And so I want to describe what I think a thing is, right? I want to define a thing. Okay. For everybody that's listening and watching, think of your friend or acquaintance that is so impassioned about their thing that they go and start a nonprofit, or that they're contemplating starting a nonprofit. Like someone has a thing, and I just simply wasn't a thing kind of guy. And I truly felt as if there was this deposit of a thing So I ended up talking to my wife about it because it had stuck around for weeks to months. And I said, honey, I got this word testimony, and I'm not a guy with a thing. So there's something here. And I'm like, I might have to do something with this, but like, I don't know. And the conversation between my wife and I was almost like a confession with a little c. I don't mean that in the Catholic sense, but it was kind of like, I better tell you about this now before I like have to be doing something with this. And then it doesn't make sense for that I didn't tell you about it, you know? So a number of months later, then I am on a mission trip in Niger, Africa. And, you know, we were doing work at orphanages and feeding programs and those types of things. And each evening on this week-long mission trip, we would debrief the day. And after we debriefed, Wade, we were on the top of the building that we were staying in, and there was a sitting area. And after that debrief, we would then have praise and worship music on, and we would go spend some time with God, um, spread across this probably 20-yard by 40-yard rooftop. Okay. Me and at this point, roughly a dozen other people. And one evening, I go into a time of prayer with praise and worship playing, and had what I described to be this face-to-face encounter with God. Now, I've been very clear that I did not see him, but it was fully just this one-on-one experience, okay, where I felt like I was fully engrossed and enveloped in him. And he says to me, "You're my guy for testimonies." And I very promptly said to him, "I'm not your guy." And he said it again, "You're my guy for testimonies." And I said, "I'm not your guy." And so this was for me very much a Moses type of moment. And the third time he says, you're my guy." And I said, "Okay, I don't know what this means, but I'll do it." And so much of this is happening in prayer through tears, you know, literally like this is just an overwhelming type of an experience with him. Come back from that trip, and there were a number of different iterations of what eventually became When You Look. It started as an app, then moved to a podcast in 2023, and the wind kind of fell out of the sails a number of different times, Wade. I mean, I'm a sales executive selling stuff internationally during a lot of this period of time. You know, like it wasn't very clear to me what it meant to be his guy for testimonies, right? But at the beginning of 2025, God moved me out of the traditional workforce, brought all of the podcast and specifically When You Look forward, and pointed me very clearly in the direction and said, "This is what I want you doing." So that's what I have been doing for more than a year at this point.
That's awesome. So, testimony. Let's talk about testimony for a moment. Um, and I love that the focus is on this right now. So, unpack testimony. What is that, and how do you approach it?
Yeah. Well, later, what came along with the single word was Revelation 12:11, which is, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimonies. And they didn't love their lives so much as to shrink from death. And
Wait, this is the souls that are under the altar, or is that a different passage?
um,
Because they're crying out, "How
I can't
long,
tell
O
you for
Lord?
sure.
How long?" And then it's until your fellow servants are also martyred.
Hmm.
Anyway, I'll look it up while you're talking. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I'm curious about the context now.
Yeah. Well, that was the other verse that came. And so what was just very clear to me was that the best thing that I could do in terms of testimonies was give people the opportunity to share not necessarily just their conversion testimonial, because those are tremendous and dramatic, but all of these other things that they testify to be attributed to God. And so many of them are miraculous. Perhaps even all of them are, depending upon how you would view them, you know? And so that's really where When You Look came to fruition, this idea of God is in all things when we look. You know what I mean? He's in all stories when we look. And there were so many dramatic stories that I was aware of through my friend set or my acquaintances, things that I'd heard over the years that I knew were being told first person, not second or third person. And so I just filed them away and thought, man, that would be an amazing story for people to hear more broadly. And then as we began to interview and have these conversations, and just like you and I would chat before or after recording, what I found is that most of the time, these amazing stories were known truly only to a handful of people, like the closest friends of this particular person, because someone doesn't walk up to you, to Wade Franson, and say, "Hey, Wade, good to meet you, man. Hey, when I was 17 years old, I almost died in a car accident. It's a total miracle that I'm alive." You know, they just don't do that. And so as we get on in life, those things just sort of get filed away and have very little room to come up. And so we showcase them ultimately on When You Look.
Thank you. And I want to take that and elevate it now, because I looked up the context.
Yeah.
It's verse 7, right? Leading up to 11, verse 7. War broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the world astray. This is the NIV. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. We're not talking about a minor. This is the final Avengers movie, right? It's not the story of Ant-Man, right? Who, later becomes an Avenger. This is the big. So then I heard a loud voice in heaven. Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. So I'm glad I asked that question, and I'm glad you cited that verse, because this is not a little deal.
Exactly.
What you're doing is not a little deal. What you're doing, I could dismiss and say, "Oh, sure, God came to you 3 times and said you're the testimony guy." Who cares anybody about a testimony guy? Well, apparently God would care about a testimony guy because of that context, right? And you and I were talking about the Garden of Eden, right? And there's this funny story there where God comes to Adam and Eve when they're hiding from him, and he asks them, "Who told you you were naked?" He's not saying, "Who let the cat out of the bag that as a joke I created you without clothes, ha ha ha, to laugh at you." That's not what he's asking, right? Who introduced the idea that there's any shame in what I created? Where did the idea come from that you should somehow have to hide from me? Well, it's the accuser of the brethren. Why don't you say, "Hey, I'm Wade. I was spared by God in a miraculous car accident"? Why don't I say that? Because of the shame and the humiliation. Because none of us want to fully acknowledge or fully believe that we are sons of God, that we are created in the image of God. And you and your show are bringing that out.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to highlight that, and all glory goes to God for it. And we spend, just so that everybody's really clear here, we spend our time talking to the people that were directly involved in it, meaning it's all firsthand on purpose. so that what we were just talking about, right? They can then be testifying, right? Confessing Christ, if indeed they see it that way, as opposed to you or I telling someone else's story that we know.
So allow me to tell a story firsthand. Is that okay? I mean, it's your
Yeah.
show, but we're gonna roll here. I'm gonna pretend I'm on your show now for a moment.
Okay,
And this is the
fire
story.
away.
This is the story that occurred to me when you told the piece about you took one step to the left. Remember that?
Yeah.
You took one step to the left thinking, I'm just going to outrun this avalanche. When you said that, I was reminded of this story that I'm about to tell. This is from my second book, and I have to tee it up. This is The Hardness of the Heart. It's 3 volumes of autobiographical stuff. You know, I have no ego. I just wrote 3 books about myself. But the context here is, I was kidnapped as a child in a domestic kidnapping, smuggled out of the country. The case went to the Supreme Court of Sweden. Horrifying divorce that shaped my life and haunted me like a demon. I was never going to get divorced. The book is called The Hardness of the Heart because I did get divorced. It refers to that story with with Jesus and the Pharisees trying to trick him into, hey, Moses said we could kick our wives to the curb for all these reasons. What do you say? And he said, Moses allowed it. He upholds Moses. He upholds the law. He says, Moses allowed it because you guys are idiots, right? Because of the hardness of your heart, because you want to do everything the hard way, not the easy way. So he allowed it. But from the beginning, it was not so. Well, but at the end of the first book, The People of the Sign, the church of which I'm a minister, the denomination globally splits right down the middle in a horrible divorce and kind of a kidnapping. All the members are kidnapped by either, half of them are kidnapped by the church pastor, the regional pastor structure, where 12 of the 14 leave the parent organization. And if you're in that church, you're kidnapped. Or you stay with the parent organization that's changing the doctrines, so you're kidnapped. And you're forced to make a choice between mom and dad who don't get along. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So this formed and changed. This is after that in my walk. And now I've joined this other, I've resigned from the church, from the ministry, and I've got a new job, and it takes me to New York. And in our church denomination, we believed that Jesus was on his way, soon to be here, and that the time of Jacob's trouble was about to hit, the great tribulation, and our job was to warn the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
To preach the gospel as a witness against them, because calamity is coming, the great tribulation is coming, and you better hide in the rock. You better repent and go to God and find safety. So we were a warning message church, a voice crying in the wilderness. This is important to the context of this story. Yeah. We also kept the Jewish holy days. There's a lot here. We kept the Jewish holy days, the Sabbath and the Jewish holy days. That's why the book is called We Were Special Elite People Who Had the Law and the Testimony of Jesus. It made us very special, and we were being prepared by Jesus to help him at his return to establish the kingdom of God. Okay, you got the scenario. Have I brought you up to speed with the prequel? Now this is the story. This is the story that I'm going to tell. I'm going to read it. And in the appendix of this book is an article here that says, New York Times article on a deadly runaway bus incident. Because when I wrote this story down, the internet was now available, and I found the story of what I firsthand personal witnessed. And again, the context is you taking one step to the left. That's why I thought of this story. Yeah. And the book is titled Maxwell's Silver Hammer, because all the chapter headings and songs are Beatles songs in this book. Okay, so I jumped at the offer, and my first trip to New York coincided with the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. In the Worldwide Church of God, Rosh Hashanah was the day of trumpets, announcing the terrible events of the day of the Lord that would destroy human civilization and decimate mankind. This was symbolized by the 7 trumpets of Revelation 8-10, announcing the return of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. From the rubble, Christ would establish a millennial reign of peace and prosperity lasting 1,000 years. This is in my head. On Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Trumpets. Despite these dire implications, the days were a highlight for us that usually found a number of congregations coming together for an all-day celebration. These were many family reunions for members of the Worldwide Church of God movement. The pastor of the Long Island United Church of God congregation was a man whom I had known in Europe. I suspected there would be others there I had known during my time in the Worldwide Church of God. Having successfully transitioned into the corporate world from being a Worldwide Church of God minister, I was eager to present this new version of myself by going to that church. These thoughts went through my head as I stood at an intersection on 34th Street and waited for the pedestrian sign to turn from a red "Don't walk" to the green "Walk." As the light turned, I took one step into the street before a loud noise to my right on the uphill side of the crossing stopped me in my tracks. A city bus had just sideswiped a taxi, and I watched, stunned, as it barreled toward the intersection. And this is what made me think of your story. And coincidence or God that you told that story and that I remembered, I don't know. Time began to crawl, and in the second it took the bus to reach our intersection, I could see the driver's face twisted into a distorted mix of confusion and fear through the large window. The look in his eyes was unmistakable. This bus wasn't stopping. The noise from the bus hitting the taxi had kept me out of the intersection, but an overeager Honda Accord driver was not so lucky. I watched in horror as the bus broadsided the Honda amidst a cacophony of crashing, squealing tires and screaming pedestrians. The car spun around before coming to a steaming halt 12 feet from where I had shifted to cat-like preparedness, ready for whatever urgent action might be needed. The time warp generated by my adrenaline drove my mind at us much faster than the bus. Years of dedication to a cause bigger than me, a focus on announcing the impending collapse of civilization and the return of Jesus, the conquering king, to usher in a divinely structured utopia, immediately turned my thoughts to saving others. My calling was to warn those further down the street of the danger heading their way at a terrifying speed. A 15-ton out-of-control beast wanting to put its deadly mark upon them. The pace of the bus was glacial compared to my racing thoughts. I envisioned launching my body down the street to shout out the advance warning. As I was imagining myself as some kind of savior, the bus exploded out of the time warp. My legs, unlike my mental processes and my ambition, were constrained by the physical world. And in a nanosecond, I was no longer ahead of this disaster. My mind raced ahead again, and I realized that an agitated warning would only draw people's attention to me while the bus splattered them like flies, turning me from a supposed savior into an accessory to their slaughter. I aborted my attempt at warning those around me and stood riveted like those next to me, watching the tragedy unfold. The bus continued down the street on a straight path, catching the next light green by chance before receding into the distance. As it moved farther away, there was nothing I could do to help that others surrounding the damaged Honda weren't already doing. I continued on my way to the Holy Day services. And then later, I learned about what happened with that bus. But the point is, how being there at that intersection changed my entire thinking around my calling, what God wanted me to do, what I thought I was accomplishing. Now, obviously, God didn't cause this bus crash, so that I could have some lesson. But he had me at that intersection at that moment. And he had you tell this story right now for whatever reason to remind me of this and to read it and to prove your point. I had forgotten about this story. I told you earlier, I said I might tell a story of my own. I had no idea.
Yeah.
It would be that story. I had completely forgotten about that story. It's like a minor story because I continued on to church after that.
You did mention though about how things changed for you. So how was that?
Totally. Right? The reason I put it in the book is it changed. It changed my mindset to, it's not about warning people.
What
For
is it?
me, for us,
Mhm.
well, it's about helping people. It's about serving people. It's about forming a relationship with them. It's about
Mm,
inviting them into a companionship, into a walk, into it's about accompanying people and loving them and
yeah.
helping them to see that God is a loving Father.
Man, and it's funny you say it that way because it's only been through the 14-year relationship that I have with him that I have learned that. Because before I just viewed him as this external, distant disciplinarian and man, he's so much of a loving dad, you know? It's amazing. Amazing.
Well, the whole prodigal son story and Jesus going after the one sheep that strays.
It's real.
Wow. Well, we're going to go to a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about what it means and where you're going next. What, you know, where are you growing next? Go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Mick Wienholt.
Meet Dr. Lori Schessler, a licensed clinical Christian counselor, speaker, and author with over 25 years of ministry experience. She's the founder of New Leaf Christian Counseling and holds a doctorate in clinical Christian counseling, bringing both depth and compassion to the work she does. Dr. Lori specializes in temperament therapy, a personalized, biblically grounded approach that helps people understand their emotional design and heal from the inside out. Whether working with children or adults, she helps individuals uncover the root of their trauma, anxiety, or relational struggles, and guides them toward lasting transformation. Her voice is warm, grounded, and deeply insightful, perfect for conversations around faith, mental health, emotional resilience, and identity. As someone who bridges spiritual truth with practical tools for healing, Lori offers meaningful value to listeners seeking clarity, hope, and change. An inspiring and thoughtful presence, Dr. Lori brings the kind of depth that makes every conversation feel personal, purposeful, and full of grace. Contact her through the website newleafchristiancounseling.net.
You know, it's such a joy and a blessing. I'm sure you feel the same way. We had Dr. Lori on the show a little while ago, and you know, every week I get to meet people who are serving God in all these diverse ways. And you know, there's another verse in the book of Revelation that says, "And then those that loved the Lord spoke often one with another, and their names were written up in a book." And it says, "And he will remember them in the day that he makes up his jewels." And jewels, of course, are formed under intense heat and pressure, but each one is unique. And even the impurities in the soil or in the material provide a unique characteristic for that particular jewel.
Yeah.
So the show, what are some memorable moments, and where is it leading, and what's next for you?
Yeah.
The
Well,
show that you
thank you
do.
for the opportunity to talk about that. I mean, so, you know, we started with a story in episode 1 that for me was just truly jaw-dropping the first time I heard it. And the 30-second version of that is a couple feels this prompt to start looking for houses, and yet they have no reason to do that. They love the house that they live in. They're a family of 4, and they end up at a dinner party, and friends that were hosting the dinner party end up saying to them that evening, "Hey, we think we're supposed to sell you our house." Which, wait, let's be honest, that's a weird proposition. You know what I mean? That is a weird proposition. And in this particular scenario, there were a number of things that came along with it, which was, not only do we think we're supposed to sell you this house, but we're going to sell it to you for what we paid for it. So they were 9 years in that house, so they had plenty of upside. They're like, that's not what this is about. And yet the house was many times larger than their current home. And they're like, we have no idea what we should do here. They pray about it. The next day, one of the wife's friends calls her and says, "Hey, I had this wild dream last night. Your daughter is standing on a grassy lawn somewhere holding a sign that says 6052, and there's a bunch of other kids running around that I don't recognize. Do you have any idea what this means?" 6052 is the house number for the bigger new house. They felt that they were to move forward with that, knowing we're a family of 4. We do not need this much larger house. 3 weeks after moving in, Wade, they get a call from an adoption agency in Colombia. And the adoption agency says, "We have a sibling group of 3. Do you want to adopt them?" So they went from 2 kids to 5 kids overnight and filled the house. And when I first heard that, I was just literally blown away. I'm like, this is incredible. You know what I mean? That's episode 1. I mean, episode 12 is a guy who has a heart attack on the side of the road during a cycling event. There are other cyclists that are right around him that are total strangers to him. They start to do chest compressions on him. And when the paramedics show up, they continue to administer CPR to him. And the paramedics end up saying in the episode, because they were literally on the conversation on our recording, they explain, Wade, that the person was without a pulse for 38 minutes. And so I then asked them, and they even say, and they're saying this in the context of, well, we finally have gotten a pulse back in him, but we don't know that he's going to survive because they got the pulse back on the way to the hospital. And they said, and if he does survive, what type of life is this person going to have? I mean, 38 minutes is an extraordinary
Totally brain
time.
dead, right? That was 6
100%.
minutes.
Yep.
6 minutes, right? Yep.
6 days later, not in a wheelchair, but on his own 2 feet, he walks out of the hospital. He is 100% back to normal 3 weeks later. And 1 year later, at the same cycling event, which was also a race and a ride, some people raced it, some people just rode it, he literally won his age group the following year. And what was really neat about this particular one is that we had 10 people in the conversation. And Wade, you can understand this from a host perspective, right? We have this wonderful, broad conversation with all of these people that are involved in this situation firsthand. And they are talking about a person who ultimately, for the bulk of the conversation, is dead. And yet he's there listening in on all of what was occurring that he has no awareness of. It was amazing to me. And then at the end, our guest, was it coincidence that this guy Corey survives, or was it God? Roughly half of the guys said right place, right time, total coincidence, and the other half said 100% God. Really, really interesting, you know, because I think, as I mentioned to you before, like, it's important for all of us to be intellectually honest and recognize that we have different belief sets. You know what I mean? And I'm going to process a particular event differently than someone else, right? So that's why we ask that question. Okay, this for some people, they would consider it miraculous. For other people, like, wow, that's really neat, really unique. That must have just been coincidence, you know? So there's just it's one incredible story after another, and and as I mentioned before, it's just really neat to hear it specifically from the people that experienced it themselves.
So where and when can people catch your show, and how?
Yeah, so we are video-based podcasts. So we are primarily on YouTube, but you can listen to audio only on any of your podcast platforms or apps that you prefer. The handle for all of those is at When You Look. We're on Instagram and Facebook as well, or whenyoulook.com. And episodes drop on Wednesday of each week.
How do you find your guests? Are they finding you? Are you finding, are there some coincidences on how you found your guests?
Yeah, it's a combination of all of the above, truly. I had started out originally, as mentioned, with these stories that I had heard and believed had enough validity to then further explore them. And then that has really then expanded out to, in the outro of each of the episodes, I ask people to go to whenyoulook.com/be a guest, and they can then submit their story. And then we have a brief conversation to kind of validate it and then kind of go from there. I've had people, what's really amazing, people have introduced me to other people on Instagram. They've just literally done a multi-person message to say, hey, you need to talk to this person. This person has a story, you know? And that's really bold of people to do, because in the one instance where that occurred, they didn't even have the person's permission to do it. They were just like, I know this person has an amazing story and you should have them on your show. You guys should talk. So what I really, though, want to highlight is that when we launched When You Look, Wade, I was worried, and that's the right word. I was worried that we weren't going to have enough episodes, because the episodes, so we're clear, everybody, are the stories. Okay. And I was praying about it, and I was like, God, I think they're out there. You're going to have to bring them. And, we're recording into the 80s now. And then certainly there's episode or podcasts that have thousands of episodes, right? But what we do not have is a lack of incredible stories of what God has done. And it is just wild to see how what I thought we were going to scrape by with, he has just simply opened the floodgates. It's incredible, and he gets all the glory for that.
Wow. Well, we as I think we would normally go to a quick commercial break before the audience comments, but I forget now. We talked about it before, and we ended up, I even forget the reason, and it doesn't matter. So we're just going to go quickly to a few audience comments here, but we'll also invite you to give a final word. But before we do go to the audience comments, anything we've talked about, covered now that we forgot, hit and highlight?
No, I think we've had a wonderful conversation. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's jump into some audience comments then. So do you have a book that you've written?
I have not. No, I've been asked that many times, actually, but
because there was a comment here. I thought maybe I had in your bio. Was your book born from a single moment? Most of the guests draw from life experiences, and I can't wait to hear them. So there was no book, but we talked about a number of moments.
Yeah, they might be thinking that that When You Look is more of a book versus a podcast, but it's a podcast.
So here's an interesting one. Relationship is the best way. This is from earlier in the show. I find that the easiest way. Have you felt less hardships since that? Have the trials diminished? I mean, I can't imagine, what you went through with when was that the firstborn child that you and your wife lost? Do you have other children? Or
so God blessed us with 3 subsequent children. Our first living child was our daughter 18 months after the death of our son Luke, and 5.5 years after that, he blessed us with identical twin boys. So we have 3 living children,
a double portion. So have there been less hardships since that moment of surrender? And
I think for sure the answer to that is no. There have been more hardships, but I need to be super clear here. I understand that what I'm going to say may sound cliche, but it's not. It's truly from lived experience, and that is that it has been easier to go through the hardships in relationship with God, because I often wonder to myself, even on good days, but more so on troubled days or in troubled seasons, how do people that don't know Jesus, how do they get through life? Because it's just simply so brutal sometimes. Um, but I'll just add to that, that while there have been more trials, as we want to call them that or whatnot, it for me has proven to be, and I certainly never set out on this path myself. So it's not a path I believe I put myself onto. Instead, it is one that I think God for sure put me onto and has me onto. And that is a path that is oftentimes called sanctification, because I am just 100% not the same person that I was when I entered into a relationship with Jesus 14 years ago versus what I am now, because of how he's grown me over time and how I have a desire to honor him where I didn't before. Simple as that, even though things had changed from a salvation perspective.
Awesome. So here's one that came in, and I was curious about it as well. Steve, the man in the parking lot. Do you and Steve still talk?
Yeah. So, we recorded For When You Look episode 33, and it released on November 7th, 2025. So literally 25 years to the day. And Steve and I have had some communication over the years leading up to that, and then many more communications more recently, as we both have just processed more and more about that particular avalanche experience. And just a really funny story embedded in that was that, I have a lot of distinct memories from that experience. And yet Steve tells all kinds of things from his perspective. And one of which is, as I mentioned when you and I were chatting earlier, he says to me, "What happened to you?" And I say, "I was in an avalanche," very matter of factly. And Steve's response to me in present day, when he and I talked about that, was, he said, "What I heard you say was," and I was like, oh. See, it never occurred to me that because my jaw was broken on both sides, that all of my speech was almost unintelligible, because my brain is believing that I'm making the sounds of intelligible speech.
Right.
And just like you laughed out loud, I did the exact same thing. I'm like, this is crazy. I had no idea. So, really,
but so immediately obvious.
Precisely.
Immediately
Precisely.
obvious. Yeah. Well, it's also to your point about allowing the space to say, yeah, it's totally fine that your perspective is that it's a coincidence. Versus that it's God.
Yep. It's because it's got to be each person's individual testimony. It's got to be a decision as well. And I believe faith very firmly to be a decision that we make. Am I going to believe in God? Am I going to believe in Jesus? Or am I not? And not everybody does.
And from a logical scientific perspective, I've often thought and shared on this show and other episodes that God exists outside of time and space. When he says, "Let there be light," people say, "Oh, that's stupid. That's not scientific." No, it's spiritual light. Let there be light. Let there be guidance. And that was spiritual light existed before the physical lights were put in heaven. Behind me is the sun and the moon, and that came on the third day. But on the first day, he said, how could there be light before the? There's a lot going on there. But the point is, God created time and space, and he did so with the word "in the beginning." Right there, he creates time. Right, for the very first.
Absolutely.
In the beginning, that's the creation of time, because he spoke that there was a beginning. So God exists outside of time and space, and therefore, from inside time and space, you can't possibly pierce to really discover God unless God reveals himself to you, right? You can't. There's no telescope. There's no equation. There's no God particle that's going to reveal God to you from inside time and space. And God exists outside of it. Just give it up. Forget it. There's a black hole. Maybe that's the exit. And there's an event horizon and no information can come in. You follow me?
Track.
So when it says in Hebrews that faith is the evidence of things not seen, that's a logical impossibility. The substance of things hoped for. That which is hoped for has no substance. But faith is that, right? And then he that comes to God must believe that he is. So you must have faith without evidence. You must have hope without any basis for that hope. And then it says, you must believe that God is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So you have to believe that he is, and you have to push for it. You have to strive for it. You have to fight for it. And you have to knock persistently, seek endlessly, and God will continue to reveal himself to you. But the fact is, he created it such that you have every legitimate excuse if you don't. Because you're inside time and he's outside of it. So God's not going to hold it against you that you and him.
Yeah.
Because he created it that way, right?
Yeah, I mean
that's how I view it.
Yeah, I mean, I track with you on a lot of that. I mean, I think it's really spot on that unless he reveals himself, you know what I mean, we would as humanity have no way to otherwise know. And it's neat to see how he did that in phases. Like, he doesn't reveal Yahweh until he's speaking to Moses, I mean, there's a lot of elapsed time through Genesis, until we get to the burning bush and Moses having that conversation with him, so it's really interesting how all that's played out.
And again, there's a progression here, just like, and there's so many analogies and they all play out. But, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old, they all have to learn different things in different ways at different times. And as a species, we also, there's an evolution, there's a progression of teaching and understanding as we grow and develop individually and collectively.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's happening on the sanctification journey as well.
So here's another one. Do you feel you'll be surprised as to how many things throughout your life were actually miracles and you overlooked? Don't want to miss any of them, and I wonder if you have a secret sauce for knowing the answer to God or not God.
Yeah, it's funny. I am absolutely surprised as to how many things throughout my life were actually miracles, and I did overlook them. I do not have a secret sauce, but I have found, though, that the more that I have, Wade, to your point from Hebrews, the more that I have sought him earnestly, the more he has revealed those things. So I mentioned this when we were roughly halfway through a conversation talking about the impact later of the avalanche and God revealing with a little r that when you hated me, I still loved you. But he also showed me many, many other things. And I'll give a quick example of this for the listeners. I, for whatever reason, probably ego, thought that I picked my wife. And what God revealed to me was, he's like, you didn't pick her. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, I totally did. I mean, like, I'm the one who asked her, you know, like to marry me. Like, I picked her. And he was like, no, I gave her to you as a gift. And when we just spend a moment more here, what he showed me was the interactions of how we met and how there was no randomness in it when it seemed random on the surface. Oh, we just got introduced through a mutual friend. Oh, that makes sense, right? So the whole time, like, we just got introduced through a mutual friend. I asked her to marry me. I picked her, right? But when I think back on all of it and look at the details of how it all came to be, it's totally clear. She was the exact one that he wanted me to be in front of at that exact moment. Because there is one time where I actually tried to meet her because that mutual friend had told me about her and she was asleep. And my mutual friend was like, you can't go in there. She's sleeping. Don't wake her up. And God later showed me, he was like, that was me. Because what's crazy is that that mutual friend is a very passive person. And in that moment, she was not passive. So it's just interesting to see how when we look back over our lives, all of these different things, and my wife she's had a lot of similar scenarios as well, where she looks back at a very rebellious period in her life where we can sum it up by saying she was doing things that she knew she shouldn't have been doing. And she looks back on it and goes, how did I not end up in a really, really bad spot? Because that was really precarious. You know what I mean? Just situationally, socially, whatever it might have been, with the wrong people at the wrong time kind of thing. And she goes, that had to have been God. Had to have been God. Because if he wasn't there, that whole thing goes down a lot differently. So I think, and again, I don't profess that there is a special sauce in any way, shape, or form, but I've had folks that have been guests, and they basically say, I try to find him in even the little things every single day. And I have adopted that as well, because that allows me then to see him more clearly in what he's doing. And it helps me to have more of my own personal evidence in who he is and who he says he is. And it's really grown my trust in him over the years. I can't hear you, Wade.
Thank you. I'll add just one thought in it. Maybe that, you know, we might think of it incorrectly. It's not that God orchestrates anything in that sense, or some of these things. Jesus said time and chance happens to all men. But the insight, the meaning, the understanding, the lesson that we can derive from the experience can be the work of the Holy Spirit. Two people, talk about perspective, two people can have the same experience and come away with a completely different learning from
Absolutely.
that. Here's one I just want to encourage. Out there, 74, had a daughter die in their arms after she was born. It was horrible. I have a tough question, but I'm afraid to ask. Please do feel comfortable if you want to ask that question. So going down, there's a lot of positive comments. Thank you, everybody, for the cheerleading. Love it. I don't know, Mick, if you can see all the comments over in the chat area. You can probably play with it. If there's one that you particularly want to highlight, you can probably find it.
Yeah, I didn't see him until just now. Thank you for letting me know about that.
Which is great, because sometimes they're distracting if you're talking and something comes in. People without Jesus, God, grow hate in their hearts instead of love. I think there's some truth to that. No, I don't want to in any way sit in judgment of anybody else, but again, this idea of interpreting the events with the help of the Holy Spirit. You know, you took an amazing leap forward at the birth of a stillborn son, Luke.
Yeah.
Whereas many people might have become extremely angry at God and not responsible, accountable, blame God for whatever things happen in their life. To your point about rules without relationship lead to rebellion. I don't know if you have a thought on that comment.
Yeah, you know, I do. And the first is that I can attribute my response and then subsequently my wife's response, but it was mine first. And I don't say that with the ego. I just know that that is literally the order of operations. That's kind of how it went. I can attribute my response because we were absolutely at that point that you just described, this sort of like fork in the road. Are we going to shake our fist at God or are we going to run to him? And the decision to run to him, in my opinion, was entirely because of his grace. I think what I knew about him intellectually from the quote unquote seeds that had been planted earlier in life helped that. But I believe fully that it was ultimately his grace that moved my heart in that direction to cry out to him. So I'm incredibly grateful to him for that. And I think that part of that is because he had plans for me to do things like When You Look down the road. And yet others that choose differently, if it even was a choice necessarily, I don't have a great answer for why they may choose that versus me, you know? But I come back to, in not a selfish way, or at least I do not believe it to be a selfish way, my experience was my experience, you know? And yet I guess, you know, I haven't spent too much time thinking about this, but I think my avalanche experience and the death of Luke are perhaps somewhat instructive, meaning that I had an opportunity to run to him when I was 19, and I still was kind of like, thanks. Thanks for keeping me alive. I'm going to keep living my ego-fueled life, you know? But he eventually got my attention. And it may very well just be that there needs to be more elapsed time for some folks that are in those very tough situations. It's super hard. I have a lot of respect for, you know, losses like the person who was talking about their baby dying in their arms. I've had a guest on my show, same type of thing. 4-month-old had a heart attack because, as it turns out, he was born with half of a heart and they didn't know that. I mean, so just absolutely tragic, and lots of respect for how tough that is.
I just posted this verse in the chat. It'll go out on all the channels. and for those watching in, we stream on a bunch of different channels. So some of the chat comments, depending on where they come in from, you wouldn't see them on whatever channel you're watching. They all stream into the studio from YouTube, from Facebook, from wherever that we stream on. But this will go out to all those channels where this is airing. Deuteronomy 30:19. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses. Testimony, witnesses against you, that I have set for you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. I didn't your child being born, you know, not alive. That's not why I'm showing this. But we interpret things, right? Interpret it positively, and the choice is ultimately what's important. But I have life more abundantly. I do want to make one comment, though, anyway, the wrong way. I mentioned I went through a painful divorce myself, and you mentioned that God gave your wife to you. I'm sorry,
Yep.
I should have rebooted my system, and I'm having slow response, but hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So I was married before, and we wanted children. And we prayed for children, and we tried everything, and we didn't have children. But I can say with some confidence, I'm pretty certain, because of all the trauma I had in my life and because of the experiences I'd had, I was smart enough to say, nevertheless, Father, your will be done. If reason now is not the right time, whatever the circumstances, then don't give us kids.
Yeah.
And I would sometimes pray this privately because I didn't want to disappoint my wife. And he never gave us children. And
Yeah.
she later divorced me, her choice. And I can say that if I had children, the wife that God subsequently would never, this old divorced guy with kids. It was bad enough that she married this older divorced guy. So what a blessing that our prayers weren't answered. And I feel like if I hadn't added that, he might have just said, you know what? Fine, here you go. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Thank you. Thank you for persistently praying and reminding yourself that what you get from me is better than what you would take.
Yeah.
And so my thought is simply this. If you had not had the experience of not having that son live, you might have not been the best father to that son or to your other children. And that it could be a blessing.
Oh, tremendous. Totally. In fact, we look at Luke's death, Wade, as the single most tangible blessing that we have received in our lives because it changed our lives for eternity and changed the trajectory of our children's lives as well. So, yeah, I mean, it was a jagged pill to swallow, but what we thought was a Luke-shaped hole in our heart, God showed us you just have a God-shaped hole in your heart, and he filled it, and he loved us.
Well, and our children are God's children. They are God's treasure, and God safely, we should hope that we are the best parents we possibly can be. But when our children rebel against us and God is able to straighten it out.
100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean,
and I think that's a wrap for me.
We get that,
I think that's a wrap for me, but what would you like to leave the audience with? What are your final words? You can have the final word here tonight and share whatever we missed or whatever you want the audience to remember from tonight's show.
Yeah, just a super quick encouragement that if you have not read the Bible cover to cover, it's been my personal experience that has been life-changing for me in doing so. I read one chapter a day, every single today that God gives me. And as a result of that, I have read through the Bible cover to cover multiple times. And in the process of doing that, I really got to see God's heart and his character being one of love. So if you haven't read it cover to cover, I would highly encourage one chapter every single today, because he may not give you tomorrow, but he's giving you today. So make it a decision, not a goal. And I think you'll be blessed by what you read and what you experience in that reading.
Amen. Well, thank you, Mick. I truly hope to have you back on the show sometime. And I'm just so glad that you finally gave in the third time God told you what you needed to do with the show that you're doing. Truly an honor and a pleasure, and I hope the audience got as much out of it as I did. As I always do, I'll be reviewing the show and writing an article about what I learned upon reflection tomorrow. Publish it on my Substack on Thursday. And I want to remind everyone here, my little tagline, which is, you are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. We've got nothing left to do but the sneak peek. Mick, if you want to hang around after that, we can quickly chat. If you need to go, that's fine too. Everyone else, we will see you next week. Same time, same place on Created in the Image of God. Hey everyone, Wade Franson here with another sneak peek for this coming week's episode of Created in the Image of God. I have a gentleman in the studio with me here that I cannot wait to introduce to you. He does important work, especially for men. His experience and his success involves being a keynote speaker, a founder of Hope Elevation, a movement dedicated to help men reclaim confidence. He challenges mediocrity as a social disease and has a protocol for educators and leaders to help them rewrite their stories, walk with purpose, resilience, and integrity, and also youth. So, one of the things in his bio, though, caused me a great deal of interest, and that was that he is an identity mentor. Welcome to the studio, Scorpio. Tell us what an identity mentor is.
Wade, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. An identity mentor is someone who helps folks. So many of us in our lives, we get down this path of following a herd mentality where we're playing it safe. We're making decisions that are often to our detriment and not really living our true lives. An identity mentor helps us kind of return to that identity, that purpose that we have deep down inside, and have the courage to run back to it and embrace it and live life truly, authentically who we are.
Traditionally, throughout history, men have been very empowered to be leaders, to be assertive. When you said herd mentality, definitely a problem, but also maybe hurt mentality, right?
Mhm.
We're hurt, not just men, but anyone hurt. Maybe our identity is wrapped up in being some kind of victim, and we've all been victimized in some way, some far, far worse than others. But still, how do you help people move forward, move past, move beyond, and move up or out or wherever they need to move?
And I think that a big part of that is realizing that his grace is sufficient, right? And we are more than enough. We have everything we need to find success. And I think once we realize that, once we turn back and understand that everything we need is within us, that's when we can really make those moves forward and start to find the progress that we need in life.
Well, there you have it. And I cannot wait to unpack this over the course of a whole hour on episode 220, airing on February 10th on Created in the Image of God. Be there for more of Scorpio Lamont. We'll see you there.